Welcome to the ActivateCX podcast, where we demystify and clarify the direction of CX. My name is Frank Rogers. I'm your host, and I help brands grow with better CX, AI, and self-service. And today, our special guest is Mark Hamill, the CEO of Arcet Global. He's dropping in to talk culture, recognition, and all things CX. Let's go. Hey, Mark, welcome to the show.
Hi, Frank. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's just jump right in. I know that CX is definitely a passion of yours. What aspects drive your interest on the subject?
I think for me, the main thing is the people aspect of it. So really seeing people get converted, for want of a better word, from absolute naysayers or people that are just a bit apathetic towards customer experience and really changing their mind and making them feel that what they do is important and everyone can play a part in it. So I think that's the thing that really gets me going. I think 90% of CX practitioners out there would say the same thing. I really enjoy the qualitative feedback in particular, like really going through those nuggets and establishing what the real challenges the company is facing or where the opportunities are for improvement. But that's the sort of very nitty-gritty scientific aspect of it, I would say.
In the CX world, really the technology dominates the discussion. Like that is really upfront. People say, well, what kind of technologies can I use? What kind of processes can I employ? But I think that the discussion, these qualitative aspects of people in the organization and cultures kind of take a back seat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just the nature of it. That's the way the market dictates, right? But ultimately, the technology is there to support customers and employees to offer this better experience. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the exciting part as well, understanding what technologies out there that can support companies better. But I think ultimately from the culture side of things, really getting into what the challenges are for those employees, how they can serve their customers better, what they can do to serve their colleagues better even, it is vital.
So what parts of the CX puzzle do you believe people don't address particularly well inside the business?
For me, it's always comes down to communication and collaboration between teams. And I would say that the thing that isn't really explored that often when it comes to general CX practitioners, I think there's a lot of great information out there when it comes to the science behind it and engaging people. But I just think that there's still this lack of entrepreneurialism when it comes to CX practitioners. And what I mean by that is more the sort of sales and marketing aspect of it. So selling upwards, downwards, sideways in the organization and marketing those ideas and bringing people along the journey. I think that's something that isn't really talked about as a key pillar for CX practitioners. And I think it should be. I think it's something that should absolutely be part of their toolkit, because ultimately I think that's why a lot of transformations fail in organizations, is that they can't communicate, they can't sell ideas, and then the blame game starts, which I'm sure you've seen thousands of times before. So
Sure.
I think that's the thing that people miss out on. I think it's a case of skills. I think they can be taught, but that aspect of it, I think leadership along with sales and marketing is something that seems to be missing when you talk about the situations where transformations have perhaps failed.
So CX isn't really, I think, inside the organization understood maybe at that leadership level. And if we're looking to affect change inside of a business, that's a little bit of the long pole in the tent, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to say we're going to deploy a new technology. And even though that's not a light switch that you turn on, changing culture, changing leadership perspectives, how people work together, there's a patience element to that. That is not going to be something that is done in 30 days.
Absolutely not. No, it can take years. From what I've learned over the years, the average is about 5 years for any organization that's above sort of 500 people. You should be looking at 5 years as success. And
Yes.
to completely change that culture from top to bottom, it takes a long time. And I think that's part of the issue as well, is that people want, our society, generally speaking, want quick change, right? Want quick results. And so people aren't necessarily given that much time. I think an analogy when it comes to football or soccer, they chop and change managers quite
Yes.
often, and because they want quick results. And sometimes it's better to stick with the strategy and the manager and see things through. I think culture is definitely one of those things as well.
Yeah, early in my career with Deloitte, I was involved with a lot of business transformation issues like company turnarounds and bank workouts and debt restructurings, company dissolutions, all kind of really negative things, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And then also involved with merger acquisitions. But it was very much on the financial and really contractual part of the
Mm-hmm.
business. And so we would come in and try to get a level set and understanding of fundamentally how did we get here. And while we were also trying to put out fires, is an interesting, I have a particular set of skills.
Yeah.
What was interesting as I did more and more of these, as you would kind of look and say, did something happen in the economy? Did something happen with maybe how they structured their debt? Or did something happen with their industry? Was there particular product changes or decisions made? A lot of times, what we found was there were real big problems in the culture
Mm.
and the inability of the culture to be agile and to make changes internally and to get collaboration amongst the people. Because many times when we would go in there to do these turnarounds or workouts, the first thing we did was talk to the people, and the people inside the business leadership at all sorts of levels remarkably had probably 50% of the answers we needed to start working on right away. They
Mm-hmm.
knew, but for whatever reason, that never made it up inside the business. So it was broken culture, which may not have been 100% at cause, but it certainly prevented any type of remediation that they needed inside the business. Companies need to be thinking customer centric, almost in a monomaniacal kind of focus, right? They have
Yeah.
to be insanely vested in this approach to get it right. And it may be really where they have survival. Do you see it with that level of intensity?
Yeah, I think you're right, and on all fronts. And one of the things I think when you're talking about the M&A projects you would have worked on,
Mhm.
a lot of that with failing cultures, they just don't have a mechanism for communicating these things internally. There isn't necessarily a division or team that is responsible for communicating these cultural challenges, and
Mhm.
and that's where you might have a survey that goes out once every 3 months, 6 months, or whatever, but you're not going to get all the insights you need from that. And also people have concerns about anonymity and things like that. So I think that's part of it. I think with M&As in particular as well, there's also the culture clash with the company that's being taken over. And usually there's someone very dominant that's the CEO of the company being taken over, and they clash with that's a different story altogether. But I think that's more of a boardroom versus boardroom discussion. But and I think you're right. There's plenty of examples of CEOs out there that are really almost altruistic and really focused on the customer because they know it's the right thing to do. And then you've got the people that are these sort of focused maniacs that are just, this is what I think is going to be best for my business and get the most revenue. And those, from the experience of what I've seen for the case studies that come in for our awards and things like that, that's something that those are the types of companies that do the best. And strangely, so even though they seem quite at opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I like the fact that you lean in with all these surveys because over the years, just from a consultative perspective, my ear has always leaned towards when somebody makes a statement. They say, we're really great at this, or this is our culture. We believe in these things. And in my brain, I have this antithetical challenge point around it where I say, as evidenced by what? you know
Yeah.
Show me the evidence. I love what you just said. Outside of that beating in your heart right now, where is that coursing through the veins of this business? And it seems like a survey would people feel courageous enough, and there isn't retribution in the system and the anonymity is there, that could bubble up. And then there's a moment of truth that individual or individuals at the top have to be able to accept. How do you work with people on accepting that truth?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think in those aspects, you have to go through it in a room which has a bit of anonymity for the leadership as well. You kind of have
Yeah.
to go through it one to one with them, and then as a group, and then you can admit where things have gone wrong in a very sort of measured way after that. But yeah, you can't just go all guns blazing and say, this is it's your fault, it's your division, whatever. It has to be a lot more subtle. It has to be with a bit of care. And some people deal with it better than others, as I'm sure you've seen as well.
Yeah, you have to have that bedside manner. I think that there's
Yeah.
that boiled frog theory. So I mean, I think that plays out very much so. Like you can come in, like you say, guns a blazing, and it does really nobody any good. Your goal is to affect change, to put an organization in the best possible way to win, to be sustainable for the people inside to win. And so it needs to be a series of almost imperceptible steps that at the very end of it, people are saying, yes, this is what we're about, and everybody feels comfortable in adoption of these ideas and these practices, and that there's a discipline that comes out in the business that starts to reinforce that. I don't know if you remember Tom Peters in Search of Excellence. Well, he did this study of so many different businesses and
Hmm.
to try and find out what were the common attributes that made them successful. And it was this kind of monomaniac with a mission element that was a success factor, but then there was also an element of culture where people truly understood who they were versus needing to reference something in a policy and procedure manual that may be 4 inches thick. Like
Yeah, yeah,
that was too slow, not agile, and it caused people to not be thinkers within inside the business. And so
yeah.
I know for myself, I had a meeting one time internally with a team, and I was brought in to kind of listen to this, and we were having a challenge in responding to a customer need. So I sat down listening to the team, and at some particular point in time, one person spoke up and gave their idea. This should be our approach.
Hmm.
And several people voiced immediately, hey, that's not who we are. And I knew at that exact moment I was not needed in that meeting. Like it was perfect.
Yeah.
And I got up and I left the meeting knowing that the people in that room knew who we were, knew what our dedication to the client was, and that any decision that they had was going to be kind of wrangled within the construct or context of that. Is that something that you work on as well as you're working through surveys, you're looking to understand the business? Are you trying to figure out what does this organization stand for?
Yeah, it's definitely part of it, and I guess it depends on the industry as well. I mean, like when you're talking about financial services, I think it's much bigger than 4 inches thick or whatever. Like when you're dealing with your bank, a lot of it's about compliance, right? So there's things that really you can't really counteract if you're an
Right.
employee, but there's certainly industries that are a lot less restricted. I would say if you're dealing with a restaurant or a chain of restaurants, you should be able to put your stamp on it a bit more effectively as a culture, much more quickly, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, it depends. And it depends on the culture of the countries that you're in. One of the big transformation programs we worked on is probably 2, 3 years ago now. That was a large telco across 12 different nations, teams across different time zones, countries,
Wow.
cultures. And it was quite fascinating working in that environment as well, I have to say. All online as well. That was a completely virtual program. But I would say that that's what you're striving for, isn't it? You're ultimately trying to get to a certain point where people can manage in small teams that they all have the same sort of doing things. And I think that does start with collaboration. Like usually any of these assessments, we're going in blind to a company, and collaboration is 90 times out of 100 to 99 times out of 100, collaboration is usually weak if
Mhm.
if they know that there's the challenge with the culture. And what causes that is communication, usually from the top down, no alignment with strategic or the strategy of the company and leadership.
Mhm.
But that can be fixed. It just takes time.
So why do you think culture is so important when it comes to CX, and how does topics like learning and recognition play a part in making the CX achievement better?
I think with culture, it's so broad that you have to look at it from your whole company exists for a certain group of customers, not the other way around. You're not making products just for the sake of making products. So you have to have that intrinsic value in the first place. And
Mhm.
if you have that, and then you have a core belief and systems in place to understand your customer better. And I guess that's why a lot of CX practices in a company sit under marketing, because you're trying to understand your customer better. But yeah, I would say that for that to work long term and have that culture you need to keep assessing and really looking at whether you are improving, where the challenges are as you move forward. What you mentioned about economic challenges for some of the M&As that you worked on, You need to be
Yep.
mindful of things of that, how that can affect culture. If there's a major economic issue that's coming down the line, what are your competitors doing as well? So it's not just looking within, but looking outward as well, and what's going on. And then for recognition, it's really rewarding what's being done well and making sure that you reward the behaviors that you want to see in your company. And so that can be internal awards. It could be just general recognition, a way of rewarding people either financially or just saying good job on a monthly basis, employee of the month, whatever it is, or a mix of those. And as long as you have a system in place and you're rewarding people that are doing the right things, the behaviors that you want to see as a leadership, then that can support your culture and strategy moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the way that you explain that is you really can't hit what you can't see. And so you can't really recognize what you don't define inside
Yeah,
your organization as attributes, behaviors. What does a win look like? Whether that's something that is ringing the bell from a sales perspective or really exemplifies the spirit or the mission of the business.
yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you've seen it before. We all have companies rewarding people for doing things that isn't a long-term benefit for the company, or you don't want all your other employees working on that or behaving
Mm-hmm.
that way, or even delivering that way. So I think it's just being really mindful of that when putting anything in terms of recognition in place, and to make sure that it is rewarding those doing the right things.
Have you ever thought about maybe in the context of when you're looking at culture, performing some form of reorganization? Doesn't have to necessarily be big, but maybe some form of reorganization where you break things down into smaller teams, like tiger teams, to be able to get better visibility into
Yeah.
performance and to get people hyper focused on a mission.
Yeah, and we've done that before, not exactly in terms of tiger teams, but CX champions is some of the things that we've done before. So we've gone into organizations and trained people that are they put themselves forward first and foremost, because I think that's important when it comes to
Mhm.
CX and culture change. And then we would train them on the skills required to be a CX practitioner within
Mm.
the company, and what their responsibilities would be to energize and inspire their colleagues within their teams, and then they would be kind of spread out across the business. And that's what we've done before, and that worked really well. And I think because they weren't just told, "Oh yeah, you're going to be good at CX, you go and do that."
Yeah.
It was quite nice that they all put themselves forward, so they were engaged to begin with, and that was successful. That really helped. I really believe it helped speed up the process, because when we reassessed that company in 6 months' time after that academy had finished, they'd come a long way. So the champions in those sort of, let's say, delivery teams, they weren't in CX department, like really across the organization. So I thought that was quite good.
I like that. I mean, because I think that CX does really belong at whether you're in marketing, in sales, product, customer service, loyalty. There is an element of CX that runs through that. And well, it does run across the entire journey, right? So that
Yeah.
it makes sense. But where do you see ownership of this true leadership coming from? Is there a spot inside the organization where you try to empower the most? And then if so, how do you fight across this command and control structure? How do you work to give that person juice inside the business?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, to answer your last part of your question, you need to get that senior leadership, the absolute CEO, to buy in and
Okay.
provide them the opportunity to lend influence, I would say, to whoever that person is, wherever they sit. I think that's essential to begin with. And really, I think it depends on the organization. I still heard this question asked for many years, and I don't think there's a silver bullet for it, really. I think if you're more of a marketing, let's say if you're a large FMCG company, then it probably sits within marketing. You're putting the products to get your marketing, spending huge spends on advertising. You need to understand the customer. You need to understand the businesses that you're selling to as well, distributors. But if you're a company that deals with a huge number of inbound calls or chats coming in, whether they be complaints or whatever, I'd probably say operations. I don't
Okay.
know, like Amazon, let's say operations, I would say. But I'm
Yeah.
guessing it's maybe there's some organizations where it's between the two where they have complete sort of autonomy, but work with both. But I wouldn't say there's a silver bullet for that, but CEO should be lending influence. And so if you don't have the buy-in from them in the first place, then it's just going to fail anyway.
One of the things I'm seeing kind of maybe on LinkedIn and a few other places is where people will have their title. It could be CMO, and then it'll say, and Chief Customer Officer, right? I don't know if you've seen this, but
I've seen that. Yeah.
it's starting to kind of percolate out there.
Yeah.
And you keep bringing up the CEO, and I like that you keep doing that, because I see a definite difference between CEOs that I meet that also know and deal with the customer,
Mm-hmm.
but actually will be on a call, will be in a Zoom meeting, will make a site visit, will move in and out of whatever the contract negotiation is going on. When that CEO is involved, I feel there is a much more of a dynamic connection to the rest of the business,
Yeah.
because they have that customer. Is that something that when you're working through this and you're identifying maybe a shortfall in that area, is that something that you encourage in terms of the CEO being involved with the customer?
I think that they need to know what's going on, and I think there's no better way than to speak with customers. We see examples of that on LinkedIn. I'm living in the UAE, and the leadership here from the royal family, they make it very clear, make themselves present in offices, government offices. Sometimes they just turn up to see what's going on, and I think that's amazing. Really, I don't really see leaders in our part of the world or where we come from that go and do that and sit and answer phones in an office, but I think it's important, and I think from a morale perspective, it definitely helps as well. If you're CEO of a large organization and you're working on the front line, and suddenly your CEO rocks up and is answering calls, or why not? I mean, just from a very basic human level, I think that's a good thing to do.
It gets people's attention.
Definitely gets people's attention. Yeah. So if you are the altruistic leader that we talked about, or the maniac that's completely egocentric, it fits both probably.
Right. So I know that a lot of things that you work on, whether it be communications or recognition, that you also use the term reputation as a key element. How does that play into CX and the CX strategy?
Well, if you are delivering a good customer experience or consistent customer experience, you are going to improve your reputation with customers. I think that's just a basic. There's nothing that can damage your reputation more than having some sort of crisis with your customer experience. And I'm sure the first thing you think of is airlines or some logistics company. There's plenty of examples of these horror stories that completely damage your reputation. So some industries more prevalent than others, but your reputation has to be considered. I don't know how you could put that as a core component of something to work towards that isn't more focused on, let's say, strategic communication side. But definitely, if you're communicating, as you said earlier as well, we are great at X, and then you've got nothing to back that up, then your reputation is going to be damaged more than if you just never said it. So I think it's a core component of what you're doing. Definitely, if you're a company, you have to do what you say you're going to do, and that's a great consistent customer experience.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that there's an element to when we're working through discovery with a client and we're talking about the various different technologies that we are starting to kind of narrow down in terms of candidates for change inside of their business. And we'll start sometimes to unpack aspects of the infrastructure and any redundancies that they have and failover that they have. And people are ready to start talking about all the sexy attributes of what CX is going to bring, the various features and functionality and the experience for the employees, the experience for the customers. But we like to say that availability is the first form of experience for the customer. And so if you're going to stack all this wonderful, bits and bobs on top of it that are going to really excite the customer, first of all, you have to be there for them when they need you. And so it's incredible, this landscape of what has to be addressed within the context of CX. And so reputation, obviously, we try to manage that with CSAT scores, NPS, and everything else. But I think that reputation takes such a long time to build, because I see that in CX all the time, and it comes out in terms of messaging. And you just I don't hear this spoken about often, but I think you hit a nail right on the head, which is if you're claiming to be X in your marketing, it's in an ad. It's on your website.
Yeah.
It's fill out this
Yeah.
form and we will do X for you. That better happen down the road. And then when that person gets on a sales call, right? Say, for example, a human being is involved. That should be whatever you claimed and whatever you talked about. We're going to treat you like X. It should feel like that in that call. And then post sale, which is where the rubber meets the road in the delivery of your promise, then that adoption cycle and that advocacy cycle tells the customer everything they need to know about the clarity and the veracity of your message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just don't necessarily see that with the majority of companies. But I would say from a communications perspective, a lot of the adverts are mainly about saving money right now. So there's no one really talking about customer experience. It's more about saving money rather than experience or selling the dream like it used to be, I would say. Maybe it's just a sign of the times, but I don't know.
I think fear dominates the communication cycle more than hope and abundance. And that may sound like very squishy terms, but I think they're really important when they stamp themselves out in terms of your intention and the next steps. There is a level of patience that is required to change a culture. There's a level of patience that's required to roll out technology. And then once it's rolled out, to go through the iterative stances that you need to take to receive feedback and make the changes that are needed to really dial it in. So it's more of a process than it is an event. And fundamentally, depending on where you are in the world, many of them have a different culture and a different mindset and a different plan. And when I mean plan, it could be timetable. So in the US, we have very compressed timetables in which to see and exhibit change. And I think that fear right now, just from a global perspective, what we've seen over the last several years and what we can kind of project reasonably into the next years coming forward, is that probably we've had the greatest level of uncertainty that that has ever been sitting on the plate as a business person. It is not business as usual. Our competitors have changed dramatically over the last 15 to 20 years in terms of being across the street to being across the globe. If we look at how people are approaching their business and how they want to engage with their customers, some of them are hanging on very closely to what does that relationship look like? And in some respects, they're slow to adoption around some of the new self-service things because they believe that their identity has been in that talk track with the customer, sending out a salesperson, being always available on the phone with a human being. And there is some part of that which is valid. And then there's a part of it which is completely bonkers because the world is changing. And you're now violating all aspects of agility. And if you think about what agility leads to, it's adaptation. And if you don't adapt, well, guess what? You know, you have a future which is pretty much ironclad for you, like where this is going to go. It has a terminal velocity, which is not positive.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose that's something that I've seen as well. When we're talking about those advertisements, it's about anti-automation almost, which I find bizarre because it's ultimately the way that we speak with people on a daily basis. Most of it's probably on messaging, right? That's doesn't have to be getting on the phone and speaking to someone. If you can resolve your challenges, issues, or whatever it may be on a WhatsApp channel or not having to call someone, I think that's everyone's 99% people's preference, probably, maybe, and certainly under 75, I would say. But so I don't see the issue with that. But the companies that won't adapt over the next 5 years, I think, will have challenges of their own making. Really, it's the answers are going to be out there and become clearer about what needs to be done, and it's not a case of which you're talking about fear, the scaremongering that's out there about certain technologies and everyone's going to lose their jobs, and it's not the case. Like, there still needs to be a human involved and should make their jobs more meaningful, because the mundane things that they're doing don't need to be done because it can be automated.
You used the term entrepreneur earlier when we were speaking in. That's such a great term because it's evocative of a mindset. They're the business starters. I've worked with some billion-dollar businesses that have been on this planet for 50 or 60 years. And the boardroom area are these old black and white photos of these entrepreneurs that just bootstrapped like crazy. They were just absolute pioneers. And they got the business to a certain level, and then they handed it over to a group of operators and managers. And they said, well, we've now created this level of market share. Let's stamp this out. They created silos, command and control structures, all these things to minimize and mitigate the risk of losing what they've gained. But in this world now where your competitor doesn't have to be the same size as you, right? They can be a quarter of the size, very much David and Goliath. And these people are more agile. They have better CX. They're listening to the evolving needs of the customer. If you think about some of these mid to larger business, what needs to change for these companies to become a modern business?
Well, there was something that always rung true for me, and it was the CEO of TripAdvisor, and he always said that a small company will always have a competitive advantage over a big company because they can roll things out quicker. And that was the mantra of what they had. And when developing things, they actually roll things out like a startup, even still, and make loads of mistakes. Yeah, but that's the case. And that's that David versus Goliath. Some of these companies that are you've never heard of are then multi-billion-dollar companies in less than 5 years. So I think that, it depends on the industry as well, I would say. There's some industries where there are huge barriers to entry. And I think that telcos, for example, you only get a certain number of licenses given out by the country. These sorts of industries will remain in the hands of operators, but the ones that are more, let's say, less barriers to entry, or ones that can really have the hockey sticks analogy, take those ones in the old-fashioned way of doing business, I think. They'll struggle, but there's still hope for them. It's just a case of turning it around and changing the way the leadership do things, I would say.
Yep, that's great. A good adage that I heard one time was, it was posed in the form of a question, which is, how do you open up a small business? And the answer was, open up a big one and wait. And so I think that there's some aspect to that is should light a fire. Well, thanks for this time. This was a good conversation.
Good. No, I really enjoyed it.
If you want to be successful, let us help you go get it. ActivateCX with a trusted advisor today. If you like this podcast and you want to follow it, please crush the link down below, like and subscribe. We're also on Apple Podcasts as well. I think you might like that. And we've got some cool things on TikTok. Regardless, we're here to kind of up the game about CX, AI, self-service. And we also have a way to help you get there from point A to point B. And we have the relationships with all the right people. I think that's a part of the equation that's important outside of competency in a product that delivers. So have a great day.